Hello and welcome back to a new video on this channel. The channel is called Warp Things. My name is Otso and today we're gonna be basing my Skaven. We're gonna be using some very basic hobby tools as well as some things I've never tried before, and we're gonna make some really cool effects on the bases. We're gonna make some water effects. This is some Green Stuff World Plasticard sheets. It only cost me €6 and this will probably be enough for my whole army. I've already done 20 bases of this. We're gonna be making 15 out of those 20. So this is from the future, hello. I haven't used this before. I did some stone tile bases for my first video as well. I did them using some cork board for my Chaos Space Marines, which really appreciate the added height that comes from the cork board. The Plasticard sheets we're gonna be using today have a much more shallow texture, so I think it's gonna be better for the Skaven. They're pretty small miniatures compared to the Chaos Space Marines I did before. I started the project by cutting a strip from a sheet of some basing Plasticard I bought for only €6 at my local hobby shop. The shallow texture is just right for small minis like the Skaven. I cut the strip roughly the same width as the bases. Then I split the strip in smaller pieces for each base. When I had them chopped up, I placed a base on the underside of the piece and held it still while I drew a circle around it. Then I cut around the circles I drew with my side cutters. At this stage I was left with a lot of cut off pieces from the bases, so I spent a few minutes cutting out some singular bricks for later use. Time to add some variation. I'm using the cutters to cut off a few bricks here and there by the edges. The material was brittle enough so I could just cut the sides and bend the piece off. I wanted each one to look different, so I just went with the feeling rather than a plan. Here and there I also cut some bricks from the middle to make potholes into the ground. I had to be really careful here not to cut my fingers. These are gonna make for some really cool looking puddles, and I'll be doing some water effects in them later. I carved the holes smooth with my hobby knife. I left just a few bases fully intact, again for some variation. Then I made some chipping so that no edges would look too smooth. When I was happy with the shapes I had carved, I fitted them on the base. They needed a bit of sanding to fit perfectly. I tried the fitment again between sandings until I was happy. I repeated that with all of them. With all of the pieces of the puzzle now ready, it's time to whip out the respirator and start supergluing. I glued the pieces to the bases and held them down a bit. Then I took some loose bricks I cut off before and added them in spots that seemed they could use some spicing up. After that, a quick prime with a spray can. The next thing is some AK Splatter Effects. Some wet ground. This is a very thin texture paint. The hobby shop I went to didn't have the thicker one in stock. This was a bit cheaper and I think we're gonna get more usage out of this because we're gonna be making it thicker as well. You could always thicken it with sand. You could always just thicken any paint with sand basically to make a texture paint. But we're gonna be using some used coffee ground that I've put in the oven. The smell is an added benefit. I mixed the coffee ground with the texture paint to make it thicker and slopped it all over the gaps on the bases. I also made some dirt piles, cause why not? Then I used the unthickened texture paint to coat about 50% of the stone tiles and rubbed it into the crevices between them too. If some went on the rim, I quickly wiped it off with my finger. Here's how the bases looked before I left them to dry overnight. I was away from home for a few days, and when I came back, I started with the painting. The first coat is some Etching Grey by Citadel, just on the tiles. I'm being a bit careful here and going around the sides too, since this is the base coat. Then I don't have to be so careful in the later steps. I tore a piece off of some packing sponge I got with some miniatures and did just that. Some sponging on the stones. The color I used was Dawnstone from Citadel. The sponge leaves a nice natural looking texture that will shine through the later stages. After the sponging, I did a generous brown wash all over the bases. I used some thinned down contrast paint for this. The wash brings more contrast to the deeper recesses and also darkens the mud in the gaps. After the wash had dried, I did another layer of sponging with Dawnstone, and I really feel like that brought it to life. The last step in the painting was a dry brushing of some lighter grey. Here I'm using Administratum Grey from Citadel. I did this sparingly around the edges and stones to highlight them and add further contrast. For the moss on the bases we're gonna be adding some green flock. You could also be using tufts, but I think in this case moss makes it look more old and worn. I put on the respirator again and started dabbing some more super glue where I felt some moss could have grown. Then I just dunked them down in the moss flock that I had spread on a lid. You can probably use any other glue for this, but I went with super glue for the time save. After a few minutes, I picked them up and rubbed the excess off. I added some more glue on the loose looking flock and repeated the dunking process on some bases for heavier vegetation. The last step before we take these bases to the next level was painting over the flock with the same thinned down contrast paint wash mix to make the bushes look wet and nasty. And here's how the bases look before we add the water effects. Pretty cool already, I think. And you could definitely call it a day here. Just spray some matte varnish over it so that the glitter from the super glue dulls down a bit. But I'm not ready yet. I want to take these bases to 11. Also, another thing I wanted to try out is making the bases look more wet and make some puddles on them. For that we're gonna be using some AK puddle effects. This is acrylic, it's basically just a transparent thick paint. We're not gonna be needing any UV lamps or any harmful resins. I cracked open the acrylic water effect and put it on my wet palette. It acts as any other acrylic paint would, and if I need to thin it, I can thin it with water. I started smearing it on the bases. I started from the water puddles and gaps in the tiles, and then I went over pretty much everything with it. I want the bases to look like it's been raining for days. I thinned it down a bit so it went easier in the gaps, but I splashed it unthinned where I wanted to water puddles. For thickness it had to be added in a few layers, otherwise it could crack when drying, so I did just that. Then for the last step, I painted the rims of the bases with some matte black paint, and they were ready. I really like how they turned out. The water effect is definitely exciting, but they would work well enough just as they were before it too. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below if you want to see how I paint my Skaven. It's definitely not a speed painting method. I take my time with these, but I want all of them to look good enough so I can just like pick one up and be like, this one is my favorite. I really want to get back to painting them. If this is the first video you find on this channel, please consider subscribing. As you might have noticed, it's been pretty long since my last video, so I appreciate you coming back. A lot of real life things have been happening recently, but I'm very much into painting again. I also been noticing many new subscribers coming. Hello. It seems like the last video I made got some traction, and I really appreciate the support. Of course, the content is gonna be more towards the miniature side. I might be doing some other projects once in a while, but at this time I'm really enthusiastic about miniature painting, and I feel like I want to make more videos about that. I have been and still am really into Warhammer, all the lore and all other stuff. I'm thinking about making some space marines as well. This was basically just a quick basic video to get back into the whole YouTube thing. For this video I just wanted to start out with something I've done before already. Leave a comment what you thought about the video. If you have some suggestions, always appreciated. Subscribe for more and check out my other videos if you want. I'm pretty new to this whole YouTube thing and making videos is always very time consuming, so I appreciate the feedback. Thanks for everyone who has already subscribed, and let's hit 500 next, right? Anyways, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.